There comes a moment in a man's life when the applause stops feeling like purpose, when the paycheck stops feeling like freedom, when the life you built by following the rules starts to feel like a prison. You did everything right. You studied hard, got the job, paid the bills, took responsibility. You showed up even when it cost you pieces of yourself. And somewhere along the way, you realized you weren't living. You were performing, not for art, not for joy, but to fit into a script you never agreed to write. The script said, be a provider. Don't complain. Climb the ladder. Retire with dignity. But what if the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall? What if success was just another scene in a play designed to keep you obedient? You felt it, didn't you? That invisible pressure to keep smiling even when your soul was screaming. You tried to silence the voice inside that kept whispering, "This isn't me." But it got louder, until one day you stopped pretending. You stepped off the stage, not to make a scene, but to finally stop acting. And at first, it felt like breathing for the first time in years, like ripping off a mask that had fused to your face. But what they don't tell you is, when you stop performing, people stop clapping. They start looking at you differently, like you broke something sacred, like you betrayed the tribe. You didn't. You simply chose truth over tradition. You chose self-respect over social acceptance. But the cost is high. You lose friends who only knew the version of you that played along. You lose status in a system that rewards silence over honesty. You lose the comfort of belonging, because now you belong to something deeper, yourself. People don't like when you stop playing your part, because it reminds them they're still stuck in theirs. You become a mirror, and most people would rather break the mirror than see what's staring back. You're not being selfish, you're not being reckless, you're being real. And in a world that survives on performance, being real is rebellion. The truth is, you were never meant to fit their mold. You were meant to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You're not broken, you're just done pretending. You didn't fail the system. You saw through it and walked away with your soul still intact. That's not failure, that's freedom. But freedom is lonely at first, because when you leave the script, you also leave the cast. You walk into a wilderness where few dare to go. But hear this, the man who walks away from the script isn't lost. He's finally found. You were never invited to write your own story. Society handed you a script the moment you were born and told you the lines were non-negotiable. Be a good boy, sit still, follow orders, don't ask too many questions. Then came school, the factory for obedience, where curiosity was punished and memorization was rewarded, where compliance looked like character. Next came work, where value was measured in hours clocked, not thoughts challenged, where showing up meant more than waking up. Then came marriage, children, bills, mortgages, deadlines, weekends that felt like seconds, vacations that felt like recovery from survival. Your role was clear: provide, protect, performance, produce, and never pause long enough to ask, is this even mine? Because this wasn't a life, it was a checklist. Birth leads to obedience. School teaches conformity. Work demands submission. Family becomes duty. Retirement brings decay. Each stage sold as the next step, but in truth, each one designed to keep you too tired to rebel. You weren't encouraged to think, you were trained to function, to follow a timeline so rigid, any deviation looked like failure, and any questioning sounded like weakness. Even your dreams were outsourced, sold to you by corporations, movies, slogans, and influencers. Dream big, but only within their walls. Be ambitious, but only in ways that keep the machine running. Because the moment you wake up and ask, what if I don't want this? You become a threat to the entire production. Nietzsche called it the moral herd, a society that worships conformity, then disguises it as virtue. a society that doesn't care if you're alive inside, as long as you play your role convincingly enough on the outside. And so millions of men stay quiet, not because they agree, but because they fear becoming the outcast. They fear the silence that follows truth. They fear the loneliness that comes with walking away. But here's the truth no one will say aloud. The system doesn't want men who think. It wants men who function, who produce, who obey, who repeat. Because thinking men are dangerous. Thinking men ask why. And once you ask why, you stop saying yes. The moment you stop accepting the script, you start seeing how artificial the play really is. You see the actors, the stage lights, the recycled dialogue, the fear behind the forced smiles. And worst of all, you see yourself, how long you were part of the show, without even knowing you were on stage. That realization is brutal. It humbles you, it hurts, but it also frees you. Because once you see the script, you don't have to keep following it. You can drop the mask, burn the costume, walk off set, and write something real. Not for applause, not for validation, but because life is too sacred to be lived secondhand. You don't escape the script by fighting it. You escape by becoming too awake to recite it. And that is where your story actually begins. At first, it seems harmless. A quiet shift inside. You start asking different questions. You stop chasing what no longer makes sense. You say less, you observe more. You begin to notice how artificial everything feels. Meetings feel like theater. Conversations feel scripted. Smiles feel rehearsed. Success starts to look suspicious. And when you stop performing, people notice, but not in the way you'd hope. They don't say, "You seem clearer, more grounded, more alive." They say things like, "Are you okay? You've changed. You're being reckless." Sometimes they're more direct. "You're throwing away your future. Why would you ruin a good thing? Do you want to end up with nothing?" Because in a world built on masks, removing yours looks like self-destruction. When you choose authenticity over approval, you don't get applause. You get concern, criticism, confusion. Carl Jung said, "Your awakened self threatens the sleeping shadow of others." When you live honestly, you force others to feel their own dishonesty. When you stop pretending, you expose the performance they've committed their lives to. And that makes people uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right. Your presence becomes a mirror, and most would rather shatter the mirror than see what they've become. They'll call you selfish, unstable, irresponsible. But the truth is, you're not destroying anything. You're simply refusing to keep building what was never real. You didn't walk away to rebel. You walked away because you finally saw it for what it was. And once seen, it can't be unseen. You can't go back to pretending, to chasing metrics that never mattered, to being praised for surviving systems that slowly drained your soul. And so the system reacts, not with violence, but with social pressure, guilt, shame, silence. They don't burn you at the stake. They just label you difficult, too intense, not a team player. But deep down, they feel what you feel. They just don't want to admit it. So they double down on the lie, on the image, on the grind. Because if you're right, their whole life needs rethinking, and that's terrifying. It's easier to blame you than face the truth. So you stand alone, not because you're lost, but because you're no longer acting. You see the machine now, the roles, the reward system, the fear behind the normal, and they see you not as dangerous, but as contagious. Because if one man walks away and thrives, it gives others permission to question everything too. That's the real threat. Not your rebellion, but your clarity. Not your anger, but your refusal to lie to yourself anymore. And so when they ask, "Why are you doing this? Why leave the safety of the script?" you smile. Because you're not trying to ruin anything. You're just done pretending. Society doesn't chain you when you walk away. It does something worse. It makes you feel like you're the problem. You're not arrested, you're not exiled, but somehow you're no longer welcome. You're labeled, branded, marked as a threat, not because you hurt anyone, but because you stopped pretending. They call you a rebel, a failure, a disappointment. You get used to hearing, "Why, what happened to you? You used to be so normal. You're being selfish." But you didn't change. You simply stopped lying. You stopped agreeing with a script that never fit. That's your crime. You started telling the truth, first to yourself, then through your actions. And in a world addicted to performance, truth is offensive. So you're quietly punished, not with violence, but with exclusion. Family doesn't understand you anymore. Friends drift away, colleagues stop inviting you. People avoid your presence like it's radioactive. You become a stranger in places that once felt like home. And the irony is brutal. The more honest you become, the more alone you feel. They don't burn you, they isolate you, because your existence is a threat to everything they've built their identity around. When you stop playing your part, you remind others they're still stuck in theirs. You're not trying to convert anyone. You're not shouting from rooftops. You're not protesting. You just walked away. And that terrifies people, because if you can walk away, maybe they could too. And that possibility is more painful than their current prison. So instead of following you, they punish you. They call you irresponsible for not chasing what they chase. They call you lost for not valuing what they value. They call you unstable for no longer worshiping what they worship. But all you did was stop lying. You said no to the mask. You said no to the noise. You said no to a version of manhood built on burnout and silent suffering. And for that, you are sentenced to quiet disapproval, to awkward glances, to backhanded compliments, to being the outsider at every table. They might not say it out loud, but their eyes speak clearly. Why aren't you like us? Why can't you just smile and play along? Because you can't. Not anymore. You tasted truth, and once you do, going back feels like spiritual suicide. This isn't rebellion, it's self-respect. This isn't arrogance, it's clarity. You're not rejecting society. You're rejecting the version of yourself you had to become to survive in it. And they feel that. They feel your withdrawal, your stillness, your quiet refusal to entertain the illusion. And they confuse your silence for danger, because a man who won't be controlled can't be predicted. And a man who can't be predicted can't be managed. So they call you cold, distant, detached. But the truth is, you feel everything more deeply now, and you'd rather be misunderstood for being real than accepted for being fake. That's the paradox of waking up. You finally start living, and society treats you like you're dying, but you're not. You're just no longer available for the version of life that asks you to betray yourself to belong. And that is the most dangerous kind of freedom there is. If walking away comes with so much pain, then why do some men still do it? Because over time, the pain of staying becomes worse than the fear of leaving. The applause starts to sound hollow. The smiles feel forced. The victories taste like ash. You get the promotions. You earn the respect. You play the game well. But at night, when it's just you and your thoughts, you realize you've lost something you can't name. You look at your life and see a perfectly crafted version of someone you no longer recognize. The man in the mirror checks all the boxes, but inside, he's gone. You are praised for your discipline, but you feel mechanical. You are rewarded for your hard work, but you feel empty. You are admired for your strength, but you haven't felt truly alive in years. That's when the shift happens, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A subtle voice inside says, there has to be more than this. And that voice refuses to go away. Because deep down, you know the truth. You're not tired of life. You're tired of the version you were sold. The meetings, the deadlines, the titles, the mortgage, the quiet desperation hiding under fake laughter. You can no longer ignore the cost of staying. Praise without presence, achievement without meaning, stability without soul. You didn't walk away because you hated society. You walked away because you refused to keep dying slowly inside it. Erich Fromm once said, "Modern man no longer knows what he wants because he does only what he's told he should want." You didn't want more followers. You didn't want another promotion. You didn't want to be the richest guy in a room full of strangers. You just wanted to feel real again. To wake up and not dread the mask. To speak without filtering. To breathe without performing. You wanted your life back. Not the version others applauded, but the one your soul could recognize. And to get that life, you had to walk, not in anger, not in pride, but in truth. And yes, you knew it would cost you. You knew people wouldn't understand. You knew you'd lose comfort, status, connection. You knew the road ahead would be quiet and long and often lonely. But you also knew something else. You could no longer afford to betray yourself for the sake of being accepted by a system that never cared who you were to begin with. You gave everything to fit the mold, and it still left you cold. So you finally made the only choice that made sense. You chose to live, fully, honestly, even if no one clapped, even if no one came with you, even if it meant walking alone, because the price of staying was your soul. And the man you used to be, the one who smiled through the pain, who nodded through the lie, who sacrificed meaning for approval. He died the day you realized he was never truly alive. You didn't lose your way, you found your center. You didn't abandon your responsibilities. You reclaimed your right to define what responsibility actually means. And now, as you walk, not away from life, but toward something real, you carry something no system can offer. Peace, not because everything makes sense, but because you've stopped pretending it has to. Not because the path is easy, but because it's finally yours. And that is a kind of wealth the world can't measure and the system can't manipulate. It's not rebellion, it's redemption. Most men don't walk away in flames. They don't burn bridges. They don't make speeches. They don't write manifestos. They simply disappear, not from life, but from the game. No public outburst, no dramatic exit, no viral post announcing their awakening. Just a gradual fading from the roles they no longer believe in. They stop arguing because they no longer need to prove anything. They stop chasing because they finally realize they were running in circles. They stop performing because the mask has become too heavy to carry. From the outside, it looks like withdrawal, like apathy, like giving up. But inside, something entirely different is happening. A quiet revolution. Not against the world, but within themselves. A letting go of expectations that were never truly theirs. A reclaiming of time, thought, energy from systems that once fed on their obedience. These men are not loud because truth doesn't need volume. They're not angry because they've already grieved the life they were never meant to live. They don't need validation because they've made peace with being misunderstood. They know something most don't. The moment you wake up, you no longer need to explain why you're leaving. You simply walk into your own life, not toward applause, but toward alignment. They say less, listen more, and observe everything. They watch the same people running, chasing titles, chasing time, chasing status, as if slowing down would expose the emptiness of it all. And they no longer want to play, not because they've failed, but because they've seen through the rules. They no longer seek to win the game. They've realized the real win is walking away from it. You'll find them in quieter places now, in still mornings, in long walks, in deeper conversations. They are learning the sound of their own voice again, after years of repeating what was expected. They don't post quotes about freedom, they live it. Quietly, intentionally, and unapologetically. Their rebellion is subtle, They don't advertise their value. They don't compete for attention. They don't measure themselves against metrics they didn't create. They don't need to be seen to feel real. They no longer use achievement as proof of worth. They no longer see burnout as a badge of honor. And they don't need to destroy anything, because walking away is its own kind of destruction, a demolition of illusion. Michel de Montaigne once wrote, "Withdraw into yourself, but first prepare to receive yourself." These men have done exactly that. They've stopped outsourcing their identity. They've stopped renting their meaning from the marketplace. They've stopped mistaking busyness for importance. And in the stillness, something rare begins to grow, a new world, not outside but within. It starts in silence, in solitude, in spaces free from the noise of shoulds and musts. And that world begins to bloom, not with permission, not with approval, but with honesty. They're not running from life. They're returning to it, not the life they were told to want, but the one they can finally hear now beneath the static. No, these men don't go viral. They don't trend. They don't lead movements. They just become whole again, one quiet day at a time. And if you look closely, you'll see them. Not at the center of attention, but at the edge of the noise. Not in the spotlight, but in the stillness. And in that stillness, they are free. Walking away doesn't mean you're lost. It means you've stopped pretending you were ever truly found in their system. You didn't abandon your life. You abandoned their version of it. You didn't give up. You gave back what was never really yours. The titles, the expectations, the image of a man you had to wear like a costume. You're not running from life. You're returning to it. Not the one made for you, but the one waiting inside you. This is not a rebellion. It's a reclamation. You're not lost. You're finally home. Because when you leave the script, you don't step into confusion. You step into authorship. You stop reciting. You start writing. You stop performing. You start creating. Your choices shift. You no longer work for applause. You work for alignment. You choose the job that feels honest, not the one that flatters your ego. You choose stillness, not because you're afraid, but because you've learned how to listen again. You no longer speak just to fill silence. You speak only when it adds truth. You're no longer obsessed with winning, because you've stopped playing games that cost you your soul. You're not chasing anymore, you're choosing. Because there's a difference between movement and progress, and between noise and meaning. Most people never stop long enough to see the difference. You did. And in that pause, you found clarity. You realized that real maturity isn't about pushing harder. It's about discerning what's worth pushing for. You don't need to be right anymore. You just need to be real. You don't need to lead the race. You just need to leave the race entirely. Because freedom isn't the ability to win at their game. It's the courage to walk away from the board. That's not immaturity. That's mastery. You're not sabotaging your potential. You're rewriting what potential even means. They told you success was a destination. You learned it's a direction. They told you happiness was a reward. You learned it's a decision. They told you purpose was something to earn. You discovered it's something you return to. When you stop trying to earn your worth, you are not a man who gave up. You are a man who woke up. And that waking led you back to something ancient, something primal, something whole. A version of you that doesn't need permission, doesn't need applause, doesn't need to be explained. A man who chooses carefully, moves slowly, feels deeply, speaks rarely. But when he does, the world listens. Because it's no longer a performance, it's truth. And truth doesn't seek attention, it just is. That's why you walked, not to disappear, but to become visible again to yourself. And when they say, "Why would you give all that up?" you smile, because you didn't give anything up. You gave back what never belonged to you. And you took back something the world can't label: your sovereignty, your peace, your life. Not the script, not the image, not the act, but the raw, unfiltered, honest center of who you are. And in that center, you are finally free. You are not alone. There are thousands of men like you, men who stopped pretending, men who chose stillness over applause, honesty over image, reality over recognition. You won't find them on stages. They don't shout. They don't beg to be understood. They simply walk, quietly, intentionally, inwardly, away from the noise, away from the game, toward something real. You'll see it in their eyes. The ones that no longer seek approval but reflect something deeper: peace. You'll notice them at the edges of rooms. They don't dominate the space, they anchor it. They don't sell advice, they live by example. No fame, no spotlight, no microphone, and yet they shift something by simply being. Men like you are not failures of the system. You are the proof that it can no longer contain everyone. You are the living contradiction, calm but awake, silent but burning, detached but fully present. And that alone is enough to unsettle a world built on performance, because your stillness is louder than their shouting. Your refusal is more powerful than their promotions. Your quiet walk away is a louder protest than 1,000 signs and slogans. You didn't have to tear anything down. You simply stopped holding it up. And the moment you let go, the illusion trembled. You may feel invisible, misunderstood, dismissed, but what you carry within you is exactly what this world is starving for. Men who live by principle, not performance. Men who do what's right, even when no one is watching. Men who would rather be whole and unseen than praised for a version of themselves they no longer believe in. You are not loud, because the truth doesn't need volume. You are not angry, because you've made peace with what you walked away from. You are not broken, you're just no longer programmable, and that makes you dangerous. Not in a violent way, but in a free way. You threaten a system that relies on silence, shame, and scripts. Because if even one man steps off stage and dares to live honestly, it forces others to question the roles they're still playing. That's how the world changes. Not in mass protests, not in viral trends, but in the slow, quiet courage of men who stop pretending. Men like you, men who leave the spotlight and find themselves, men who stop performing and start living. You may never be quoted, you may never be followed, you may never be celebrated, but you will be remembered by those who felt your presence and saw your freedom and quietly asked themselves, what if I could live like that too? Because truth is contagious, so is courage, and so is your silence. You are a quiet fire in a world addicted to noise. And that fire, that presence, that unwavering clarity is how everything begins to change. Not all at once, not for everyone, but for someone, somewhere, watching, waiting, ready. You are not a rebel. You are not lost. You are not alone. You are just one man who stopped pretending, and that was enough.